So the time has once again come for yet another fighting game on my humble hunt for the worst fighting game ever. Today's game, though, is a bit of an oddball simply called Versus. A PlayStation 1 title dropped onto the console on November 3rd of 1997, Versus was THQ's attempt to hop on the fighting game craze of the late 90s and early 2000s. Developed by Polygon Magic, Versus is a 3D-ish fighting game that stars an incredibly eclectic cast of 20 gangbangers that are sprinkled across 4 different gangs with wildly different themes for each. Versus is quite the strange game, as I mentioned 2 lines ago, and I mainly say this because, man, it is hard to find anything about this title. Typically, as I go about my research phase for a given game or show or movie, I can find a decent bit of information on it. This one, though? Not so much. Now, I'm gonna go out on a limb and assume it's mostly due to its name. The word versus is so commonplace amongst games that even as I got more specific in my searching, I still mainly got the bevy of versus games Capcom released to PlayStation 1, or I got articles on the PlayStation 1 versus the Nintendo 64. Shit, I could maybe find 1 or 2 listings for this game specifically on eBay. And that was it. At the end of my searching, I could only find a handful of videos, some incomplete move lists on GameFAQs, and I do know there is a premium strategy guide out there for this game as well. One I couldn't find a downloadable PDF for, unfortunately. The game's practically an enigma, an artifact of the fighting game golden age that was simply lost to time. Suppose now it'd be appropriate to throw on a fedora and grab my bullwhip so I can get down and dirty with this game. The first interesting thing I did find out about Versus, though, is that it's an Americanized remake of a game called Fighter's Impact, a Japanese exclusive game that saw a release in both arcades and on the PlayStation 1 as well. Which I decided to grab this game too and give it a quick run through to see how similar they were. Just let me find the grappler in this one real quick. Wait, oh no. But yeah, Versus definitely uses the animations created for Impact, but there are some mechanical differences between the two. I'll probably cover Fighter's Impact in a future video since, well, I have some footage of it now. Might as well use it for something else. This is a Versus video and will remain as such until the end. The setup for Versus is as such. In the mean streets of today, there's no law nor order, only turf and the gangs dedicated to protecting it. Real people who learned to fight because they had to, and no fancy bullshit like those other fighting games with their fireballs and their spinny kicks. Weakness is not an option in this future. Give another gang an inch and they'll take your whole hood. Fighting has certainly never been this close to home before. You know, as someone who grew up in the mean jungles of Ixar, I definitely agree. This reminds me a lot of my life. Hey, wait a minute, I thought they said there was no law in the future. Why is there police cars? Versus' package goes on to promise me loads of cool characters, familiar environments, more blows, blocks, holds, throws, combos, and counters that I could handle. Versus, I won't lie to you, I play Virtua Fighter. There is no amount of moves that I cannot handle. It also goes on to promise unbelievably fast gameplay and tons of kickin' alternative rock tunes to pound your opponents to. Fuck yeah, dude. This sounds like a good time already. Let's go. Upon booting into this game, you'll immediately notice a distinct lack of kickin' alternative rock tunes. Just dead silence. I thought this was a little odd, admittedly, and this dead silence stretches through all the game's menus. This isn't a bad thing, I just like background music, and a lack of it is always very noticeable. Versus itself offers a handful of modes to play with. Versus against both the CPU and another player. Rumbles, which are basically gang versus gang modes where you have to eliminate an entire opposing gang to win. Kinda don't like that I can't draft my own team, admittedly, but I get it with the game's gang aesthetic. There's also a survival mode, which is just you lasting as long as you possibly can against a stream of foes, and Exhibition, which is just an AI versus AI theater mode. Which I like that, since, well, I used to sim stuff like Fire Pro matches all the time when I was younger. I'd have loved this feature if I'd had this game as a kid. The main mode you'll be spending time in, though, is the Challenge mode, which is a quasi-arcade mode where you'll pick a character and battle all the members of the given gang he or she is in, including the unlockable boss of the gang, who you unlock to play by simply clearing the challenge mode of a given gang. I found it a bit odd I wasn't able to challenge a respective gang with a different gang member, though. Oh well. Let's take a look at the characters in this game now. These Street Samurai were designed by former Marvel Comics artist/colorer Curtis Fujita, whose main goal with Versus was to create a cast of characters that Americans could identify with while maintaining the visual flair of Japanese anime and manga. I definitely identify with the clown because I play League of Legends, as well as the pimp, the surly Russian cabbie, and the effeminate strong man as well. Mama. Credit where it's due, though, all the characters in this game do have pretty striking designs. Honestly, I think these characters could best be described in meme form. The enemy stand user could be anyone. The enemy stand user. Can't prove it, but wouldn't surprise me if Fujita took some influence from Araki when it came to his game's character designs. I got major JoJo vibes looking at a lot of these portraits. Or maybe I'm just seeing nothing and I think about JoJo's Bizarre Adventures a lot, as most people do. As mentioned, the characters are broken down via gangs and the places they represent, which includes the streets, the hood, the beach, and the campus, as well as a boss gang, but each of these four are just the big cheese of a respective gang, so not their own thing. It's a very distinct group of brawlers for sure, though, all of whom have their own respective fighting styles, ranging from kung fu, aikido, professional wrestling, street fighting, and just a generic martial arts category. Is there a difference between Pi-Kwa Kung Fu and Pa-Kwa Kung Fu? One letter, which is potentially a typo, I think. If you know me, you'll know I immediately went for whatever characters had the pro wrestling style, which was only 2 characters at the start. Guttural streets ganger Oleg, who I love just because he communicates via grunts. And Kenny, a beach representative and the effeminate strongman that I mentioned earlier. There's plenty of other cool characters though, like Pimp Slim Daddy. Hey, Bruce Lee, XB, and Kalukog, since what would a fighting game be without one? It'd be Kensei Sacred Fist, and Aussie Weeb and Harold, and the game's poster girl Mia has a pretty nice character design too.
Can't you keep up?
Kinda think the Ahegao portrait for her is a bit strange though. I guess Vikram's doing it too. Maybe Oleg is just the fuddy-duddy in this gang here. Though I am curious as to why some characters have full alternate outfits while some, mainly the ones I played, just have recolors. What, didn't want to put Oleg in something more stereotypical? My favorite boss character though is Hood Leader Hendrickson, partially because he reminds me of Joggy from Fist of the North Star, but mainly because of this. Yeah, that shotgun ain't just for show. He uses it, and it does a shit ton of damage. Pretty sure it's unblockable too, which, you know, makes sense. Honestly, props to Fujita and whoever else might have helped design these characters. Everyone is incredibly over the top and wacky, which is really only complimented by the schlockiness of the voice lines.
It was an honor to destroy ya.
It's okay. You can cry. Touchdown.
It's great, honestly. Every gang also has 3 stages to do battle in, some having walls, some being endless stages, and some having open areas for free ring-out victories. Admittedly kind of finicky ring-outs, though. For some reason, my suplex never ringed anybody out. Gotta knock them up high, I guess. Stages are okay, in my opinion. A bit flat and unimpressive at times. Sweet Psychic Pebbles cameo in the playground stage, though. Got his famous catchphrase and everything there. The models, though, are pretty detailed for a PS1 game, and damn, Versus actually runs pretty smoothly. The game wasn't lying about its frame rate, and I could see why a lot of reviews mentioned it back in the day. The best part of the stages, though, are those kickin' alternative rock tunes. Unlike other fighting games at the time, Versus has an OST that consists entirely of licensed music from a handful of different bands, which included Raised in Black, Los Infernos, The Pigs in Space, and The Suicide Machines. And yeah, the tracks are pretty kickin'. I don't make money on these videos, so here's some samplings of them. With all the fun stuff out of the way now, though, let's get down to brass tacks and talk about what really matters with most fighting games. The gameplay itself. I'm gonna be honest off the bat, though. I basically went into this game 100% blind. No manual, I didn't have that Prima strategy guide, and what guides I could find online only really enlightened me to my character's special maneuvers, which, while helpful, none of them went fully into attack strings. So I basically sussed out a lot of this game myself mechanically. So if you're a fan of this game and know something I've missed, please do let me know. It's in the interest of fairness more than anything. Uniquely, at the start of every round, as the fight loads, Versus gives you a slide puzzle of your character's portrait to solve, which is just a fun little mini-game, which you can skip once the fight loads. I'm bad at slide puzzles though, and thankfully all that happens if the puzzle is solved is that the fight starts immediately. Control-wise, Versus is pretty simple. One punch, one kick, and an evade option which sidesteps up or down depending on which input on the D-pad you're holding. The evade is interesting too, since if you time it with an opponent's attack, you'll effectively deflect their attack and reset the neutral game, though with your opponent's back to you. Everybody has back attacks though, so don't think you've automatically won the day, obviously. There's also this flamey blue meter, which means something. I probably should have bought the guide. Blocking works the same as Tekken, and weirdly it seems Tekken grabs works by pressing no buttons at all. I say that because when I was trying to practice throws against an empty player 2, every grab I did got teched. So, hands off when you're facing a grappler, I guess. Weirdly, you can only move toward and away from your opponent, and while you do have jumping attacks, you don't have a normal jump option like in Fighter's Impact. Pressing buttons in combination will also yield different attacks as well, stuff like grabs and these power moves which put your opponent into a stun state for free combos. Every character has a standard parry too, which is done by pressing back punch plus kick, 4 PK if you're more into numpad notations. You also have a wake up attack which will always pop targets high for a free combo, so don't just go running up on your opponent thinking it's free. So there's a pretty good amount of defensive mechanics here, so you won't get overwhelmed while you're on the defense. I have to be a bit critical though, because man, controls in this game are stiff and rigid as all hell. Every combo is a dial in and one you cannot change mid-input, so there's no going back once you dial in that PP8P. I also found executing the grapples to be a bit odd. You practically have to be giving your opponent a rectal examination if you want to grab, and your grab doesn't have a whiff animation either. The grab input always produces a different kind of strike when you execute it. This got pretty annoying sometimes. The grabs are pretty cool though, at least, and do big boy damage, as they should. Inputs are also not particularly complicated either. At the worst, you'll have to do back forward for a move, and that's it. No whack pretzels or 360 motions to deal with. Your power moves are also pretty devastating if you pull them off, since it stuns your foe for a good bit of time and sets them up to be comboed immediately. Just be sure you don't get this crappy headbutt move as your stun move, because goddamn this stun sucks. Awful, awful hitbox. I also will compliment the strings in this game since they're pretty modular. As I experimented more and more with Oleg, I found I could basically end my PP string with basically any special input, so a kick or an 8P double axe handle for instance. This extended to most of the characters in the game as well, so you have all sorts of mix-ups at your disposal once you start figuring out your character more. If you don't feel like learning mix-ups though, just figure out whatever's broken on your character. For instance, every grappler had this dashing tackle which had an insane hitbox and always set you up for a ground grab, which I don't think the ground grab is actually techable at all. Yeah, I never teched it at least. Never failed in my experience. I needed something abusable too, because there are a handful of characters that will show you no fucking mercy whatsoever. Every gang had at least one super hard fighter to deal with, and after learning 4 characters to go through every gang, I could see why reviewers back in the day mentioned this game's difficulty. Vikram, Ramos, and Leith in particular were absolutely disgusting opponents to deal with. Hendrickson wasn't bad either, but none of the bosses measured up to those 3 titans. Those 3 will test your resolve and patience in learning this game for sure. Your resolve, which can be easily crushed because the scoring system in this game is similarly unmerciful. Gotta be honest, I've never seen a scoring system in a fighting game actually send you into the negatives before. This exists just to wound your pride, I'm sure of it. A lot of my learning runs didn't go great, obviously, but thankfully Versus embraces the whose line is it anyway system of points not mattering whatsoever. Honestly, getting fat negative points is just funny more than anything. So on that note, I think I can wrap this one up. The eternal question arises now though. Where does Versus end up on my worst fighting games of all times list? All said and done, I think I'll slot Versus in as the new number 6. Honestly, I had a decent time playing Versus. Looks-wise, it's probably better than Kensei, but it definitely wasn't as fun. The game's stiff controls and fairly bland environments do knock it down a peg, but its slick-looking characters, decently animated attacks, and rock-solid soundtrack sit it above the rest of the list. Versus was definitely one of those titles that was pumped out to capitalize on the fighting game craze back then, but just couldn't match to contemporaries like Tekken, Dead or Alive, or Virtua Fighter, so it got lost in the sands of time. Doubly so, since it had such a simple name. Regardless, it was a pretty pleasant little game to play, even if it was just another middle-of-the-pack title for the list. Thanks to viewer Schlockinator for suggesting this one. It was a good time for sure. Anyways, as always, my name is HadesManticore, and this here channel be City State Manticore. Thanks a ton for watching if you did. Leave a fatty like, comment whatever you want, and be sure to subscribe for more content. I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye.